Picture this. You are hungry. Not the kind of hunger you feel when you've skipped a meal, but the kind that claws at your ribs, dulls your mind, and makes the edges of the world blur. Your belly has been empty for days. The wind outside is a knife, and the snow on the ground hides every root, every seed, every scrap of edible life, and the only food left is one of your kin. It is a thought so unnatural, so unbearable that most of us would rather die. But in a land like this, where winter stretches on like a sentence without end, survival has no rules. Beneath a jagged limestone cliff, far from any village, lies a cave the locals call the Hollow That Hungers. Its entrance is a shadow against the rock, always cold, always still. No birds roost here, no animals dare wander inside. When a team of archaeologists stepped into it in the summer of 1999, they were expecting the past, perhaps the bones of mammoths, the tools of long-vanished hunters. What they found instead was a story written in fragments of human bone, skull caps, cracked and shaped as if for bowls, long bones split lengthwise, the marrow scraped away, teeth marks, human teeth marks, pressed into the surface, and in the blackened remains of an ancient fire, the jawbone of a child, burned, brittle, and gnawed. This was no predator's den, no massacre by outsiders. These people had consumed their own. At first, scientists resisted the conclusion. They searched for other explanations: ritual, burial practices, even the scavenging of wild animals. But over the decades that followed, more evidence emerged, from caves and shelters across continents. It told a truth more disturbing than anyone wanted to believe. This was no single act of desperation. This was a pattern, a way of life born from a land so harsh, it turned humans into cannibals.
The story of the Hollow That Hungers begins, like so many great archaeological revelations, with a coincidence. In the summer of 1999, a small research team set out into an unmarked stretch of karst limestone in a remote valley. Their goal was to survey a series of rock shelters that had never been formally excavated. The area was rugged, steep slopes overgrown with thorn scrub, with a river cutting deep through its base. It was the kind of place you could pass 100 times without ever noticing the black mouth of the cave. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Marianne Holt, later described it in her field notes. The air was unnaturally still. There were no birdsong, no insects. The entrance was so narrow we had to go in sideways, but once inside, the ceiling opened into a chamber so silent you could hear your own heartbeat. What first caught their attention was not the bones. It was the smell, faint, but there. A dry, mineral tang, mixed with something like old ash. As their light swept across the walls, they saw layers of soot clinging to the ceiling. Generations of fires had burned here, so long ago that their smoke stains had hardened into the rock itself. Within minutes, the team began finding fragments. Not fossils turned to stone, but actual bone, brittle, yellowed, and scattered. Some were unmistakably human. Others belonged to animals now long vanished, wild horses, red deer, and an extinct species of rhinoceros. At first, the team assumed the humans and animals had shared the same fate, hunted, eaten, their remains left in the same hearth. But then they noticed something no one expected. The human bones had been treated differently. Skull fragments had been worked, the edges chipped smooth, as though to create vessels. Long bones were split with precision, as if someone had known exactly where to strike to release the marrow. And the teeth marks. They were too small and uniform for wolves or big cats. They matched a human jaw. By the end of that first week, Dr. Holt's team had mapped over 200 individual bone fragments from at least 6 humans, men, women, and children. No burial pits. No arrangement of the bodies. Just remains mixed with ash, tools, and animal bones in a way that suggested something deeply unsettling. When news of the discovery leaked to the press, it was reported as a curiosity, prehistoric puzzle from the Ice Age. Some suggested it was ritual defleshing, a form of ancestor worship. Others dismissed the marks as accidental damage from trampling or scavenging animals. But Dr. Holt wasn't convinced. She had seen similar evidence once before, years earlier, at another dig in southern France, Molagursi Cave, where Neanderthal bones bore cut marks identical to those made when butchering deer. And in Spain's El Sidrón Cave, she knew scientists had uncovered the remains of an entire family of Neanderthals, all processed for food in the same deliberate way. The difference here was unsettling. The hollow's remains weren't Neanderthal. They were early modern humans. People who could have looked you in the eye and spoken in a language you might almost understand. Still, no one was ready to accept the most disturbing explanation. Not yet. It would take years of careful excavation, radiocarbon dating, microscopic analysis of cut marks, and the cross-comparison of DNA to sites across continents before the truth became undeniable. This was no isolated event. The hollow was part of a network of survival shelters across Ice Age Europe and Africa, places where famine, isolation, and the unforgiving climate pushed humans to their limits. And when the choice was between starvation and survival, the bones proved which path they chose. From the moment the first fragments were collected, Dr. Holt's team knew they were dealing with something far more complex than a simple burial site. The real work began once the bones were in the laboratory. Each piece catalogued, photographed, and examined under magnification. The first breakthrough came with cut mark analysis. Under a scanning electron microscope, the grooves along the edges of the bones revealed a story that eyes alone could not see. These marks were not random scratches or the work of scavenging animals. They were clean, precise incisions, V-shaped in cross-section, consistent with flint or chert blades. The cuts clustered around the major muscle attachment points, thighs, upper arms, and shoulders. This was textbook butchery. Next came percussion mark analysis. The long bones, femurs, tibias, humeri, were fractured in ways that matched experimental archaeology tests for marrow extraction. When a bone is smashed with a hammerstone, it leaves distinctive impact notches and flake scars. On nearly every human long bone from the hollow, these marks were present, positioned exactly where the marrow would be richest. And then there were the burn patterns. Some bones were blackened and cracked from high, direct heat, a sign they had been roasted or cooked over open flame. Others bore a different type of damage, calcined white surfaces, caused by intense, prolonged exposure to fire, perhaps in the final disposal of remains. But the most unsettling evidence came from the tooth mark study. Forensic odontologists compared the impressions on the bones with modern human dental casts. The alignment, spacing, and pressure points matched almost perfectly. The biting agent was human. On one tibia, the bite marks overlapped with cut marks, showing that flesh had been stripped with tools and then gnawed to reach tendons and scraps of meat. By now, the ritual theory was becoming harder to defend. This was not ceremonial. It was consumption. To understand why, the team had to reconstruct the environment as it existed roughly 14,700 years ago, near the end of the last glacial maximum. Pollen analysis from soil samples revealed a tundra steppe biome, wind-blown, dry, dominated by grasses and low shrubs. Large grazing animals, reindeer, wild horse, aurochs, would have migrated seasonally through the valley, leaving long, empty months with no substantial food. Ice core data from Greenland suggested that this period saw extreme temperature swings, sometimes within a single decade. A sudden cold snap could decimate local plant life and drive away game animals for years at a time. For early humans without agriculture, survival depended on hunting and foraging. When both failed, there was only one resource left: the bodies of the dead. But in the hollow, the evidence suggested it went further. Some of the cut marks on the bones showed no signs of weathering before processing, meaning the victims were likely butchered immediately after death, not after days of exposure. An isotope analysis revealed that many individuals had been raised in the same area. They were locals, not outsiders killed in conflict. Ancient DNA sequencing added another layer to the mystery. By extracting genetic material from tooth pulp and dense bone, scientists confirmed that all the human remains belonged to Homo sapiens sapiens, fully modern humans. In fact, several of the individuals were closely related, siblings, cousins, perhaps even parents and children. This ruled out one easy explanation, that the cannibalism was a form of tribal warfare against unrelated groups. Instead, it pointed to something far more unsettling, intragroup cannibalism. In other words, they were eating their own. When compared with genetic data from other sites, like Goff's Cave in England, Moulagursi in France, and El Sidrón in Spain, the similarities were striking. All showed signs of marrow extraction, skull modification, and selective cooking. The dates varied by thousands of years, but the pattern was the same. This was not a cultural quirk of one isolated band of humans. It was a survival strategy, appearing again and again wherever the environment turned lethal. As the evidence mounted, a grim picture took shape. The hollow was a shelter, a refuge from the cold, but also a place where the living consumed the dead to endure. Bones were processed with the same skill and method used for animal prey. Children were not spared. The practice occurred repeatedly over generations, suggesting that it was normalized during times of scarcity. And there was one final, chilling detail. Among the remains, archaeologists found 2 human skull cups, fashioned from the upper crania of adults, smoothed at the edges. Residue analysis revealed traces of animal fat and plant starch inside. Whether these were used in ritual or simply as practical containers for food, no one can say for certain. But they were found next to hearths, as if they were just another piece of kitchenware. By the end of the 2000s, the scientific consensus was clear. The hollow was not an anomaly. It was part of a broader reality of early human survival, a reality in which cannibalism was not only possible, but, in certain lands, inevitable. In the end, the evidence left no room for doubt. This was not a random act. Not the chaos of war. Not the echo of a strange ritual lost to time. It was survival. And it had been repeated, again and again. The people of this land were trapped in a cycle dictated not by choice, but by the earth itself. They lived in a place where the winters were longer than the summers, where the game vanished with the first snow, and where the rivers froze into silence. When the food was gone, they turned inward. The young, the weak, the sick, they were the first to fall. The dead became the resource that allowed the living to see another sunrise. Muscle stripped from bone. Marrow sucked from the hollow shafts. The very skull reshaped into a vessel to hold the next meal. What makes this truth so disturbing is not just the act itself, but the scale of it. This was not a desperate decision made once, in the shadow of extinction. It was a practiced skill, handed down like a grim inheritance. Every cut, every break, every fire was part of a process learned and remembered. These were not people incapable of empathy. They buried their dead in other contexts. They carved artwork, made tools, raised children. They understood loss. And still, when the hunger came, they did what the land demanded. Across continents, the same story played out. In England, in France, in Spain, in Africa's southern coast, the bones speak the same language. The land starved them. And they answered by consuming their own. For modern humans, the thought is unthinkable. But for them, it was the difference between life and death. There were no farms to fall back on. No herds kept in pens. No stored grain. Only the flesh of those who could no longer feel the cold. The hollow that hungers is not just a cave. It is a reminder. A reminder that beneath the surface of our history lies a truth we would rather ignore. That our species survived not only through ingenuity and cooperation, but through choices so dark they almost defy comprehension. We are the descendants of those who endured that hunger. The blood in our veins carries the memory, even if our minds try to forget. We like to believe that we are far removed from the people of the Hollow. We imagine ourselves more civilized, more compassionate, more human. But the truth is more uncomfortable. We are them. Their blood runs in us. Their instincts lie dormant beneath our skin. Famine still shapes the course of history. When food runs out, when resources vanish, when survival hangs by a thread, humans change. The boundaries of morality shift. Lines that seemed unbreakable begin to blur. In the 20th century, in besieged cities and lost expeditions, there are stories that echo the same grim choice: survival through the flesh of the dead. It is not bound to the Ice Age. It is bound to hunger itself. The land of the Hollow has healed. The wind still moves through the cliffs, but it carries no screams now. Grass grows where ice once ruled. But under the soil lie bones that tell the truth, a truth about what we become when the world strips everything away. It is not a pleasant truth. But it is a part of who we are. If this shocked you, wait until you see the next prehistoric mystery, one that suggests humans were not always the top predator. The evidence will make you question everything you think you know about our past. Subscribe, and join us as we open the next door in history's darkest corridors.